Okay, it's a couple minutes. Do folks feel like we can just jump right in? We do have a limited amount of time. And hopefully we can get through have some good lively discussion here. My name is Marilyn Carpentero. I'm the Vice President for Programs and Strategy at Common Cause. Welcome, everyone. I don't know, Brittany, if you want to share the screen. I just want to pop up a few slides. Like I said, thank you again for joining. I want to first shout out Netroots for really supporting this discussion and for the Democracy Initiative for really leading and pulling this together. If there ever was a time to have a conversation like this, the moment is now. Before we kick off, I do want to say a few words about the Democracy Initiative, who convened this panel and proposed it to Netroots. The Democracy Initiative is a national coalition of 45 civil rights, environmental, labor, and civic organizations really formed to restore the core principles of democracy. Collectively, members of the DI represent 45 million members. There is, if we go 2 slides over, you'll see a great slide of all the organizations that are a part of the Democracy Initiative. And Democracy Initiative is really working at the state and national level on broad democracy reforms. You'll hear a little bit at the end of the session about some activities that Democracy Initiative is doing for you to participate in other trainings. Also, just for full disclosure, Common Cause, who I work with, is one of core members of the Democracy Initiative. In fact, the president of our organization is co-chair of the DI with Tafari Gabray of the AFL-CIO. So hopefully, Brittany, you can pop in a link to the Democracy Initiative website, so folks want to learn more or get on your list, they can go right there. So we want to kick this conversation off for everyone who's here, just to confirm this is the panel Democracy No Longer Deferred panel, but we want to really kick off this discussion with what is the current state of our democracy. And let's just focus it at least in the 2020 context. So I think before many of us can agree here, before the pandemic even struck, we were anticipating the 2020 elections to be really a firestorm of racial animus, hyperpartisanship, foreign interference, misinformation, and mistrust. And circumstances have only really grown more turbulent as communities all across the country are grappling with police brutality on people of color, violent assaults on peaceful protesters. All on top of that, adding, COVID-19, which really has forced also election officials to rapidly adopt new voting structures across the country. In the face of aggressive disinformation, litigation campaign by the president and his allies to suppress the vote and really undermine solutions such as vote by mail. And that is not even that's not even half of what we're dealing with in our current state of democracy. We're also the attacks on fair representation, the census, the economy, our education, our healthcare systems, all of which are under unprecedented attacks. And the greatest impact, those that are greatest impacted by these attacks on our democracy have been and are Black and Brown communities and families across the country. So we're coming back here. I want to come back to why we're having this conversation. It is so crucial because we're at a crossroads in our democracy where for us to achieve an inclusive democracy, we need to ensure that communities, Black and Brown communities, are engaged and at the center of the efforts to move a pro-democracy agenda. And to do that, we need leaders, and we need organizations to come together and work together to try to win. And this discussion today, we have a great group of panelists who serve and work with activists across the country, with workers, moms, immigrants, LGBTQ, that are all and other communities really working against racism, the climate crisis, and poverty. So we're going to hear from them about how, how they're engaging in the communities that they serve and how they're fighting back, and also get some, strategy from them about, how we all can show up. And I say we, because even though I am a brown woman, a Mexican, my parents are Mexican, immigrated to the States in the 1970s, but I also work for an organization, Common Cause, that our membership is predominantly white members. And so when I say we, like organizations like Common Cause and others, really, we need to come together to support organizations and support leaders who are making this fight and really can help lead us in it, because that is the only way we can win. So I just wanted to start our conversation there. So we're gonna hear tactics, we're gonna highlight challenges. It may be a little uncomfortable at times, but these conversations need to happen. So I want to welcome our great list of panelists. You may have seen their bios, you may have chatted to them. We have Maya Berry, the Executive Director of the Arab American Institute. You see on the screen where you can follow Maya, as well as learn more about her organization. Then we also have with us, next slide, Bill Cobb, who's a former Deputy Director of ACLU Campaign for Smart Justice, a campaign advisor for Jamal Brown for Congress. Also, if you heard him earlier, he is a jazz enthusiast. So he had it playing a little bit for us earlier before we all went live. We have Brissa Johnson, the statewide civic engagement director for United Domestic Workers of America. You can follow her on those links. And we have Jonathan Butler, who is a community organizer, the democracy campaigner for Greenpeace. Greenpeace is also a core member of the Democracy Initiative. Actually, a lot of organizations that you saw from the list are core members. So I want to turn this over to allow each of them 2 minutes to introduce themselves. Then we're going to go into some questions that I'll be posing to our panelists. And then we're going to save some time to the end so that you all can enter questions in the chat. Hope that sounds good for everyone. So we can shut the PowerPoint down and we'll get started. I want to start with Maya. Oh, Maya,
there we go. Good morning, everybody. Marilyn, thank you so much. Thanks to friends at DI, and thanks to all the incredible panelists I get to be with this morning. My name is Maya Berry. I am the Executive Director of the Arab American Institute, which is an organization established in 1985 specifically for the civic engagement and political empowerment of roughly 3.7 million Arab Americans in this country. Our democracy only works if people are engaged. And as an ethnic constituency, we encountered really unique barriers to our involvement in our democracy. Hence, our group came together and fought for our opportunity to be at the table. Our work is varied and with a lot of focus on the intersection between civil rights and civil liberties. So I'm delighted to be with you this morning and look forward to our conversation.
Bill?
Peace and love, everybody. I'm Bill Cobb. I am a 50-year resident in the city of Philadelphia. My last job was the National Deputy Director at the American Civil Liberties Union, where I ran their largest campaign in their 101-year history to reduce the number of people in jails and prisons by leveraging litigation, legislation, comms, and organizing. We put out plans and drove work to reduce the jails and prison populations in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and Washington, D.C. I left the ACLU. I rooted myself at home on my couch, where I'm leading independently a couple of efforts. Cobblestone Solutions helped to launch and provide Jamal Bowman with the framework and networks across the country in order to win a congressional seat. Last year at Netroots, I met many people here. I told them about Jamal's campaign. So thank you to Netroots for volunteering for Jamal campaign. We love you, we thank you. We look forward to working with you every day. So additionally, I'm on the board of Community Legal Services and Philadelphia Legal Assistance, and I previously was on the board of the Defenders Association of Philadelphia.
Thanks, Bill. Brissa Johnson.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you so much again for this opportunity. Thank you for joining us, participants. It's such an honor to be here. My name is Brissa Johnson. I'm based out of San Diego, California, and I am the Civic Engagement Manager for United Domestic Workers Local 3930, which is the Home Care Providers Union and now the Child Care Providers Union under AFSCME. They are our big father, big parent here. And in addition, I am the local coordinator for the San Diego Black Worker Center. And so San Diego will be joining a national network. There are currently 8 Black Worker Centers nationally known. San Diego will become 9, and i.e. Riverside area will become 10. And so I am the lead coordinator on the creation of that. I'm super excited to bring a space to San Diego that is rooted in civic engagement and rooted in the liberation of Black people. Thank you again for my time here.
Thank you, Brissa. And Jonathan.
Yes, I get the pleasure of rounding us off. Hey, y'all, my name is Jonathan. I use they and them pronouns. Coming to you, I wish, per my background, from a beach, but I am coming from the DMV. Glad to be here with all of you all and the brilliance in this call. I am the democracy campaigner at Greenpeace USA. For those who don't know, Greenpeace is an international entity who works on environmental justice issues. And in particular, in the US context, we work on everything from voting rights to fighting back toxics and waste removal sites, sacrifice zones that greatly impact Black and brown communities, as well as continue to fight back against the attacks on key democracy reforms like fighting the influence of the fossil fuel industry on our politics, and making sure that it's actually people who are represented and the folks that are coming from their communities to make sure that they are getting the needs that they need to survive, as well as clean water, clean air, all the good things, right? And then also coming to you from the perspective of having 9+ years of community organizing experience. So I also include that into the context that we bring through Greenpeace. So when we're talking about today's topic, democracy no longer deferred, we're also talking about the canvas. We're also talking about field work. We're also talking about the many ways in which we have to continuously engage our communities year round, not just on the interwebs every 2 and 4 years. And really excited to have the conversation today with the folks in the room. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So let's jump right into the questions. So let's kick off with the first one, right? That I think we all are faced with. The democracy space really tends to be significantly whiter, older, and male dominated than the rest of the movement. So does the lack of diversity impact strategy and execution and the success rates on the campaigns you are working on? I can, Maya, let's start with you, the impact.
Sure. Great question to start with. It certainly does. And I think the easiest way to sort of understand it is that sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And the ability to be able to work on specific issues with the understanding that the frame may not be what folks assume them to be. We are in the middle, I can give a very sort of specific example. We're in the middle of a surge of hate crimes in our country and have been. It's been increasing since December of 2014. The surge of white supremacy in particular, we literally had neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville saying Jews were not in the places. So there are real problems with hate crimes and white supremacy, and the need to respond has traditionally been framed in increasing our response to hate crimes. And in the last decade or so, there's been this new effort to sort of move into the space of national security responses to these things. So we are dealing with folks who I think are very well-intended, who are looking at this white supremacy surge and saying, what do we do here? And for some, the answer is to double down on deeply, deeply flawed national security policies that have been targeting our communities for decades. So one of the things that's happening, and it's coming from the left, not necessarily from folks on the right, is to advocate for a new domestic terrorism charge. I think everyone that enters into those conversations is very well intended, and it's about responding, as I said, to the increase in hate. But if you don't have people in the room that understand how robust our counterterrorism policies have been. If you don't have people that have been directly targeted by those countering violent extremism programming that became the BIE programming, which is Black identity extremism, if you don't have people that understand what it means for government policies that target radicals, and by radicals I'm talking about, you know, James Baldwin to Ralph Abernathy to Edward Said, these are our people. And these are policies that have been deployed, and it's just one of those things where our strategy to combat a new domestic terrorism charge has to be rooted in the understanding that sometimes it's your allies who simply don't know what they don't know, and we have to do better on advancing those issues. So yes, I think that's an issue, and it's one we encounter regularly.
I would
Go
love
ahead.
to piggyback on that, Maya. Thank you. I'm going to use lived experience that I think everybody can relate to, and that's public. So as the National Deputy Director at the ACLU, I was the first formerly incarcerated and obviously Black man to ever lead as an executive, particularly in a national organization, control $1 million a year, and determine exactly what the hell we were going to do. However, that's why I was hired. I had been doing those things in the city of Philadelphia, working with partners across the country, and then identified by white men as someone who had the capacity to give the ACLU credibility, validate the reasons for them receiving $100 million that no one on the ground had heard about, but raise hell in the public and the media. So I was actually hired as a direct result of 8 to 10 formerly incarcerated people visiting the national offices of the ACLU and cussing and yelling at Anthony Romeo, Jeff Robinson, and them determining that they were going to invest some way in making a space for formerly incarcerated leaders. However, the position wasn't guaranteed to us. I actually applied for the position after learning from it through Just Leadership that was formed by Glenn Martin, who's a Black man who's no longer leading that organization, who's formerly incarcerated, but he provided a fellowship opportunity. It provided me the connection to the ACLU. The ACLU interviewed me. I was hesitant. I know I had no business going there, but I needed employment. I needed medical. I was living with unemployment, unable to find consistent employment because of a 25-year-old criminal record. And even while serving on the boards in these places in Philadelphia, no one would hire me. And because I've made noise my entire life, since the day that Frank Rizzo stood in my grandmom's house with his vote white fucking thing, I was raised by Black Panthers and Temple University and Lincoln University students who taught me Pan-Africanism. So I'm so rooted in this shit that I'm always been the person that people have leveraged and pimped and given tokens to, and then they've taken my work, exploited it, and many people are working in my shit. Like Clean Slate is an initiative that I conceived after working with Sharon Dietrich and CLS, and then bringing Rebecca Vallis aboard because Seth Williams, like the DA that I worked with to get elected, decided to turn his back on us and target us because he was being targeted with criminal investigations. So me and Sharon decided that my case needed to be sealed, a 20-year-old thing, automatically. We should get it done nationally, and we worked to get funding. And now I can't even get a job running the initiative that I started here in the city of Philadelphia that's related to me. So of course, stale, pale, white male leadership is in the way. When I was at the ACLU, we filed the lawsuit to allow a racist institution to march to threaten to kill me. I was there, and the Black leadership inside of the ACLU was silenced, but we were destroyed inside. White leaders cannot effectively help us because they empower themselves by calling their inability to pay restitution, to give the land to the people who own it, and then stop saying that I'm a criminal because I've had to survive, and now I can live, and I've learned how to thrive. And so you target us with death and persecution.
Thank you, Bill. I want to pose maybe this question to Jonathan or Brissa. It's like, why do you think there's so much resistance from establishment organizations to centering the experience of the need of historically marginalized communities in strategy development and campaigns. And it may not be from your organizational, but also what you see externally. So what do you think the resistance is? Or is, yeah.
So I think in regards to the resistance, I think what we are used to is, well, one, there's two things. And I've said this before in other spaces, is like politics right now is kind of January at the gym, right? So there's a whole new burst of energy of people wanting to get involved, wanting to get active. And I feel that our current establishments don't necessarily know how to fully capitalize on the energy and how to really engage the individual and meet them at their level, right? So I think because of lack of inclusivity, we tend to miss the target on exactly how best to engage these communities. And I think we miss opportunities to really humble ourselves and really meet individuals and attempt to adopt new tactics and new strategies that really reach to the most underrepresented. I think we put people of color just in one box, right? We put Black and brown folks in one box, not realizing that within that box, there's also additional layers and levels, and we tend not to dive as deep as we need to go. I think the second part is we've gotten used to taking Black and brown votes for granted. We assume that they may not vote on the full right side, so they're going to have to vote to the left, and we don't add tangible deliverables throughout the years. And so people of color, for example, have put a lot of people in office, right? We were like, this is the leader, this is the one, we're advocating for them, and they get in office and then they just disappoint us. Progressive leaders have disappointed us. And so I think people of color in their own individualism are now looking for other ways to add to democracy, other ways to engage. And it's not aligned with the strategy that the establishment has already used in place. I think the other thing is too, we have to realize that some of the original tactics that used to work for field programs and campaign, they don't work anymore. And so we need to be really innovative. And lastly, what I will say is, in order for new strategies to thrive, to have a robust democracy where we don't feel that there's where we're breaking that resistance, is to really get more younger voices in leadership and to really be developing in that mentorship. I'm only here because somebody opened the door for me. Somebody honestly just gave me a chance. And so I want to make sure that as we are talking about these things, we're also looking at our tables and acknowledging whose voice is missing.
Right. I want to just put a pin in after we go to Jonathan to think about what are those tactics, what are the different things, especially as people are organizing and engaging in a different way, or maybe people are now re-engaging who may have taken a break. So just put a pin in that. Jonathan, did you want to add anything here?
Yeah. I was just going to quickly add two pieces, is that I think building on that is one, I think also just acknowledging the ways in which the mediums that we use, the platforms that we use to communicate our campaigns and our messaging have shifted. Again, the 24-hour news cycle, social media, all these things, right? And so there is, if we're talking about resistance, there's a resistance to tell complex layered stories that can't be easily fit into a headline, right? And so again, speaking for the environmental movement, I think that's why we had a lot of struggles, is we're just kind of now getting into a space where we're talking about Black and brown and indigenous folks and the very rich and long-standing history that those communities that we've had in the environmental movement for generations upon generations. Also, when we see calls to actions fussing at people about plastic straws, we're not even acknowledging the fact that they're Black folks who are also differently abled and have disabilities. And so actually plastic straws aren't an accessible thing, but saying everyone shouldn't be using plastic straws is an easy call to action, right? So I think it's also because we live in this news cycle, we live in this media age, telling those quick stories are what gets the clicks or what gets the eyeballs or what gets the fundraising. But when we actually like take the time to take a step back and tell more complex, nuanced stories, we actually get to a more full narrative and scope of what we have to offer. And then also, secondly, thank you, Brittany, for uplifting the fact I always forget all the things that we do, but we also work on dissent, right, and protecting folks' right to dissent. And so also when we're talking about restrictions, we also just have to be honest about the ways in which white supremacy and capitalism impact our world and our view lens, because it's the fact that like we uplift and praise the Edward Snowdens of the world who are whistleblowers, but then when we have Black and brown and indigenous folks who are also whistleblowers or are also trying to protect the right to dissent, the way that media covers those stories, the ways that we support those petitions and those donations and those GoFundMe's is drastically different. So I think we also have to have that analysis in the work we're doing. Yeah.
On that point, do you think, Jonathan, on that point, do you think because the times that we are in, yes, because you're right, like when you have the Snowden thing and people are rallying, you have these other things, but because when Black and brown people are raising their voices, there's this automatic like criticism, skepticism, whatever, there's all these other layers. And maybe this question goes to everyone, is like, do you often find yourself pushing back on within coalitions and others actually saying, trying to lift that point? But how does, and if you do, how does that usually end up playing out? And do you think, I have a feeling, I will make an assumption that I feel that sometimes it doesn't play out the way you, right? So do you think now, because the moment we're in, it can play out differently now? I don't know if that
I'd like to just, again, so very personal and public experience. Like, I love the fact that I was elevated to such a national public place. So what happens when you cuss people the fuck out, which I do regularly at home and at work? They terminate your employment, they lie, they prevent you from getting jobs, and they whisper bullshit about you. And they tell people that they do what they do. And then if you're a young Black activist who have really just had enough and are determined to live or die, you continue your activism until they disappear you, like they are all those young Black activists in Ferguson. And as the brother indicated, no GoFundMes, no media, no cooperation from police, no outcry from the nonprofit industrial complex. So those are the things that I've experienced and that are currently happening still. Can it change? Certainly. We are the change. So it's happening through us.
Yeah, and the thing I was going to touch on is like just the operative term for me was like coalitions, right? So I think also like in the era of like everyone wants to put out a statement, or whether that's in terms of like they want to put out a statement because like they're driven to, or whether because they feel like external factors are kind of like driving them to do that. I think there does end up kind of being a select few folks who oftentimes are like the Black and brown indigenous folks who are just like, oh, have you included this analysis? Have you included this language? Maybe we should update this. And so I think also like when we're talking about that work and the ways in which folks are engaging, we're also talking about a distribution of labor and how like Black and brown and indigenous folks, in particular like women and femmes, are often like the ones putting forth that emotional and intellectual labor to like push us around those things in those coalition spaces. And I think in this moment, and even like some of the stuff that came have been seen in the past like month or so, I do see that folks are starting to like shift their posture, but it really takes everyone in those coalition spaces and in our organizations to take on responsibility, to being a part of doing the work, to also making sure that you're reading, to making sure that you're going and doing that piece, so that we're all able to show up and that it's not just a select small body of folks who are actually trying to push us around that politic and push us towards like actually being more inclusive.
Maya, Brisa, did you want to weigh in here?
I was just going to make one point. So much of our campaigns involve educating others to move them to our policy positions. I think one of the challenges when we talk about these issues is that in addition to moving others, you really are spending a considerable amount of time educating your coalition partners. So it's about assembling the team with you first in order to get the broader campaign out. And I mentioned one issue, but it really comes up in multiple spaces. So I think that's one of the additional burdens, is to understand how to move people forward. Sometimes you spend a lot of internal organizing before you can do the external part.
All right, Princess, do you want to weigh in? But if I want to come back to something that you had said in your comments earlier about the different tactics, thinking in different ways how to engage. So what are those tactics? What can we share with those on the call to think about, like, how do we begin to engage people and create, pathways for engagement that's authentic and real and longstanding? So I know you're working with workers, right, and unions, and so are there things there that other people can adopt, especially in this moment?
Yeah, so I think in regards to like new tactics, I think one is really diversifying your base and who you're reaching out to, and really breaking them down. So it's like, for example, I work right now on the creation of the San Diego Black Workers Center. And so specifically with the Black Workers Centers, we are now looking at this group of Black workers. If we move in this box, we don't reach people where they're really at. So we have to really break down this category. So it's like, okay, Black folks that are employed in positions that aren't necessarily quality jobs, right? Then it's like those that are unemployed. Okay, reasons why they're unemployed. If they're disengaged youth, if they are coming out of the incarceration system, if they have dealt with racism and discrimination. So there's all these different layers within this one box. And I think creating strategies for those different layers is really key. What works with college students isn't going to work with someone who college wasn't an opportunity for them, even though they're both 18, they're both 19. The message, sorry. Okay. When we're talking to voters who come from, families where voting was encouraged, or they've had access in some sort of political education, versus someone who, may have been raised in the streets and gangbanging was a lifestyle, and not judging that lifestyle, but meeting them where they're at. I can't go into certain neighborhoods and just say, hey, y'all, voting is important. But finding individuals from those communities, from that experience, from that background, and giving them the tools to now go into that community and do the work. So I think that's one tactic, is when I say meeting people where they're at, I'm really saying is like, people on your team need to be a part of these stories. They need to have come from the backgrounds and the experiences that you're really trying to grasp.
Thanks, Marissa. I know we want to turn to get some questions in, because we only have about like 12 minutes left, I think, before this shuts down. But I wanted to, when we were prepping for this conversation, I wanted to come back to something that Maya had said about democracy and how we think about democracy. And democracy is a privilege. And I want to know, Maya, if you can just share that thinking when we were talking about democracy is not the same for every person. I just think it's very important to uplift that as we think about how we advocate and try to change,
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's the case, and it shouldn't be. When we talk about it and actually, I really, hearing you talk about this, for some folks who don't have the privilege of being able to spend their time thinking about democracy because they're doing frontline issues that are in preservation mode. It's one of those things that's kind of this wonderful lofty idea. And yes, I support democracy, but what does it look like in my life? So how do I protect my vote? We've all seen the photos of literally the post office boxes that came out yesterday in Wisconsin. For some folks, the thought of how my ballot, first, I'm able to cast it. Second, it's able to be counted. How I'm able to navigate this whole process may come multiple layers removed from my job, my language access issues, my unique issues that I'm facing as a community. I mean, the Arab American community is exceptionally diverse. So it runs the full gamut in terms of folks that have been here multiple generations to new immigrants who got in before we instituted the Muslim and refugee bans. And it's a challenge. It really is a challenge. And I think it's on us as the organizers, it's on us as the institutions to say, how do we show up, right? If I want to come right now, our campaign on the census is one of the most important things that we are doing. I can't stress enough for anybody talking about anything to understand that if we fail to get an accurate count, particularly of hard to count communities, Black and brown communities, Native Americans, disabled, LGBTQ, if we fail to get an accurate count, the ramifications of this are going to be way beyond Donald Trump leaving office. And when you look at these counts, I'm from Michigan, that's my hometown, right? The single highest area that had the best count in 2010 was Livonia, Michigan, with an 88% self-response rate. So when you look at Michigan and it's already met its 2010 self-response rate, you're like, fantastic, everything's good. When you look at Michigan and you start going into specific neighborhoods, when you go to Dearborn, Michigan, the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the country, then you're looking at a less than 50% rate. Come right next door to us in neighborhoods in Detroit, you're looking at less than 20% response rate. So if I'm doing the macro, everything is just great. But the moment that you actually start looking and understand it, and that's the point of the nitty gritty democracy, right? The moment that you're actually doing the substantive analysis of what's happening in local communities, that's where you start to see the two Americas.
Thanks, Maya. I want to turn it over for the next few minutes if there's any questions from any of the attendees. You can just put it in the chat. Is anything there?
Oh, the panel outline.
Sorry. Well, I think one thing is like that was raised in here is like the need for trusted validators. It's not a question, but I think a lot of the work that we are doing. Maya said this earlier, is like we spend so much time educating our allies already. It's like we also need to think about developing those additional validators to lift up some of the things that we're saying, because not all people, as Riza said, was like receive the information in different ways. So we spend a lot of time in the need to create validators. And I think I'm going to make a generalization, but I think there are validators that are growing and growing by the day in this movement. And I think we just got to keep lifting them up. We do have a question here from Diana Flores. Can you share more on tangible deliverables and what innovation and field campaigns can look like?
Yeah, so I would actually like to add to that question. Thank you, Diana, for the question. So one of the things that I've really been pushing in my civic engagement work is not using art as an accessory, but using art as an anchor. And so I think a lot of times we circulate our movements and voting, and we have these, rallies or these events. And right now we're in a time where we can't like physically come together. And so we've used accessory in the past as like, okay, let's get a spoken word artist to be there after we have these guest speakers. Or maybe we should end the event with some music. And so what we've been doing now is using music, art, visual art, poetry as ways to share a message, and using it as the anchor of the message, and really trying to convey through art powerful, persuasive tactics and messaging around voting, around the census. We did one census video where we had a woman dancing, basically doing like African dance, and every time there was a reason why it was important, she danced harder and it broke down the walls that were around her, basically acknowledging the idea of getting funding, and that funding coming in and transforming the neighborhood and the environment around her. And so I think one of the most innovative ways we could do is to start put music, rap, poetry, art right at the center of the message that we're trying to convey.
I'll piggyback on what Brittany's indicated. Cut it off. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So, at what point do you stop? Because you stop before it kills you. You stop before it debilitates your ability to make money. You stop before it takes the ability for you to have joy. When you're rooted in the community, you remember, you're working in order to get connected to power. You're working to raise money. You're working to validate yourself. But me, I'm home. I'm sitting on my couch. I'm still mad as fuck every day. Young people are dropping off guns and shooting a bunch of people in Philadelphia. My friends are dying from COVID. I don't want to hear, I don't want to work for anybody. I need $20 million to do the exact same thing that I did at the National ACLU. And until I have that, I root myself. But we got to remember that the thing that we're more responsible for is to listen, learn, love, and do that for self. And that is we need to really heal right now. We need to really do something different because we're in a very different time. And so we really need to spread peace and love. And it starts with self. And then everything after that, one day at a time, y'all, we're fighting. Let's love each other. Let's do that more than anything else. Peace and love.
And if I could also just jump in really quick, because also like I want to touch on with something that like all three of the other panelists has offered is like, I think there's a point of like disaggregating the data, right? So that we actually know who we're talking to and what are the actual real impacts on the ground. And then also, I think we're also talking about in terms of like, I love the framing and the question around innovation. It's like, we're also talking about disaggregating the power, right? Because I think if nothing else, COVID-19 has shown us like where a lot of the bottlenecks in like access to resources and access to like power are, right? And so I think, especially in terms of like the ways in which, again, I won't speak to everyone's or specifically, but just within the environmental movement, a lot of times there's certain sectors where like there's expertise in this certain specific aspect of environmental justice. And now we're saying that because we can't be in the same spaces, we can't do conferencing like we used to, you know, even like being now in Netroots, we're all virtual, right? And so like actually trusting the people on the ground with those resources and not hoarding those resources and actually like not operating in an expertise culture, but operating in a space where we're actually like allowing everyone to build those skills and strengthen those muscles on their own, I think is also part of like the innovation. I don't think it's an innovative concept, but I think it is like part of like how we innovate. It's like, okay, if I have access to like 45 different like you know, white papers and like all this different access on like climate justice, I can read them and that's great, but like also can I share those with community? Can I share those with those validators that we're talking about? And also can we make sure that folks are getting the training to make sure that whether it's the census and going out and talking and making sure that folks are properly counted, or whether we're actually talking about making sure we're incorporating these different tactics and components. It shouldn't just be us as folks in the nonprofit world or in these different organizations. We really should, I think COVID has kind of shown us that we really need to be building community intentionally in that way. At least that's my, you know, I statement.
Am I able to address Yasim's question? She said, at what point do you stop educating your partners to cut ties to move forward?
Yeah,
I love this question because as I'm getting older in this work, I've been doing this work since I was 22. I'm 32, so 10 years. And I am exhausted with my allies, especially working in labor. Labor is predominantly white, male driven, and I am an Afro-Latina woman. So I am constantly being shut out sometimes of executive board meetings, especially when revolving around police, defunding of the police, and us urging, you know, for years now, for our labor entities to disconnect with police unions and police coalitions. And it's gotten to the point where sometimes I'm not told of when the meeting is. There's been times where I am the only person of color at the table and I say, hey, this is not going to look good with our community partners. I'm telling you right now, as a woman of color, don't do this. You're going to get a lot of heat. And they don't listen and they move forward and then they get a lot of heat. And it's been stressful. It's been draining. And so I've gotten to a point of, and this touches on your question, I don't necessarily move forward. I don't necessarily cut ties and move forward with everyone because I know I'll see them again. I make my position clear and I find people that I can work with to move a different agenda. And so I say, you know what? I am tired of fighting this wall. I'm going to figure out how to go around it. So I just stopped trying to break the wall down. I figure out new ways by working with different people who share similar values and similar ideologies to develop a second agenda. The other thing in regards to dealing with these partners as well, and I think this is really important, is we are no longer seeking, we're no longer having private meetings for public responses. And that's where I'm at right now. There are allies of mine who I would normally call on the phone. I would text them. I would say, hey, we need to talk. I saw what you did at city council today. I saw your vote. It wasn't okay. And I want to know why. I am no longer giving people that grace of let's have this private meeting. Let's call them in and not call them out. I am in the business of calling people out. I am in the business of putting their name and adding them on Twitter. I'm in their business of making Facebook statuses and adding them. And let's just go there, because at this point, you're a hindrance to the movement. And if you really care about these communities of color, then care and show up for communities of color. And we're not going to have private meetings for public responses anymore.
Thank you, Brissa. I want to, I see Matthew's question. I know we're tight on time, but I'm going to tweak his question a little bit. Sorry, moderator privilege here, just because I would like to have everyone close, like, to be like, coming out of November, because let's just face it, everyone's focused there. So coming out of November, and you look into the new Congress, what do you think, what do you think should be the top, what is it from your organizational perspective is the top campaign issue that you're going to be working on? I tweaked it a little bit because this is a nonpartisan discussion, and I also don't know where everyone falls, so I'm just trying to make it a general thing. As your organization, what's your top campaign that you're going to be working on after November?
I'll be brief, no matter how long this is. So I'm just going to be working to make sure that 100 million people living with arrest and convictions are leading. I so much love all of the suggestions, but the truth of the matter is we must learn how to lead, follow, support, or get out of the way. And all of that's leadership. And so I love the panel's energy. I love that all these leaders are fighting in institutions that are, racist and rooted to make sure that they stay in charge of narrative and funding. So keep winning, keep fighting. Who knows what this is going to look like? Stay alive. Don't let COVID get you. Peace and love.
Thank you. So, Maya?
Sure. So regrettably, with the realization that the census isn't going to get us to where we need to be, one of our priorities immediately is the redistricting, and to make sure that people like us are at that table when those maps are drawn. That is one of our top priorities going into this. I would take us back to the issue of hate crime. We have a priority of improving our response to hate crimes, including hate crime data collection and reporting. You can't fix a problem, you can't diagnose. I'm quoting Heather Heyer's mom, Susan Bro. We have a legislation called the Khalid Jabbar Heather Heyer No Hate Act. That will remain a priority for us because we need to respond to this moving forward. And then honestly, we just have to fix our country. It's broken. It's broken on so many fronts, right? I mean, a humane immigration policy, an improvement to our criminal justice policies, the need to address family separation. The list of what has to happen and striking a better balance. I always come back to this between our civil rights and civil liberties. Civil liberties are kind of like the democracy conversation we had. You don't know how important they are until they're gone. and it's more important and more impactful for certain communities. So those are the priorities. But I think the most important piece is for folks on the local level. When things are failing us here in Washington, please focus locally because you can lead in ways that are better than what we're able to do here in DC. And I think that's a really important way for us moving forward.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, just quickly, environmental justice. We gotta make sure we actually have a livable future and a livable planet. But then also specifically the right to dissent. And I want to take also a moment to uplift the unjust charges that have been brought up against local activist Tiana Arata. And the felony charges, again, just for organizing a protest. So like when we're saying that, like, it's not even folks committing unlawful acts, but just like getting these felony charges for like saying, let's come together for a peaceful protest, naming that as those attacks on our right to dissent and our First Amendment constitutional right. So seeing that as a continued thing, and also just naming that post-November, I think we'll all be in for a surprise of what will kind of happen. But we'll be ready and we'll be out there and continue to support local campaigns and local leaders.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Brissa?
Yeah, so as you all know, I come from labor and I'm critical of labor because I love labor. not because I am against them, because I love them. I critique them. And labor has not always been the best at standing up for communities of color, specifically Black communities. And so one of my efforts, continuing now, and it will be heavy in 2021, is this establishment of the San Diego Black Worker Center, joining the national and really standing up for Black workers to not only be put in positions of quality jobs where they're paid a living wage, they're offered healthcare benefits, and that there's room to grow within the company, but that we are advocating for Black workers that are already within established unions, that our unions and their leaders step up in addressing racial and discrimination on the job and making sure that we're creating systemic change through policy and getting rid of anti-Black rhetoric within a lot of these current establishments and their policy language. And so that will be what I'll be focusing on, is the elevation and plight of Black workers, because we know that the Black agenda has been suffering regardless of who's been in office. We've hurt for decades on decades in housing, health, education. I could go on all the list on where Black women and Black men are just suffering tremendously and dying every day from bad policies and bad elected officials. And so the plight for Black liberation is extremely crucial to me still and forever, moving past November. And I choose to do that through focusing on Black workers.
Thank you. Thank you all to our speakers. Thank you to all the attendees who joined us today. There'll be slides coming out, and also you can try to connect with any of these individuals and their organizations. I do want to just, before we just close and they kick us all off the Zoom, to invite Brittany Baxter from the Democracy Initiative just to say two words of what they have coming up. And I just want to put a plug in the context of Common Cause, as Maya was redistricting, looking at our courts, looking at ethics, campaign finance reform. So there's a lot of us in this room, and there's a lot of people across the country that, a pro-democracy agenda at the state and national level, one that is inclusive and has, everyone at the table, and to ensure that we have fair representation so that elected officials aren't choosing us, we're actually choosing them. So I want to go to Brittany to do, just to take us out.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, and thank you to all of the panelists for participating today. At the Democracy Initiative, we prioritize centering our conversations and our work around democracy that is from the perspectives and a race class analysis that is rooted in those communities that, like the name of this panel, are so far removed from democracy that they don't even know what it feels like. And so the only way that we can win on these issues is to center our strategies and our narratives in their experiences, so we can bring those folks in and expand what our democratic process and what this work looks like. So what we are doing, with 4 minutes to go, I'm actually going to share my screen so we can go back to the slides. The Democracy Initiative is doing a number of things. We are pushing and demanding that the U.S. Postal Service be fully funded and our election is funded so that we can protect voters, protect poll workers, protect our election, so that folks can have a safe, secure voting access and options. I also am the training and movement building coordinator at the Democracy Initiative, and so I am dropping a link in here. You all can sign up for training. We are training because in 2016, we needed 900,000 poll workers and volunteers to run the election, and the average age of a poll worker is 70 years old. We recognize that we are going to have to fill that gap, and with all the attacks that we see that are ramping up every day, we know that we're going to have to train an entire army of democracy defenders who are coming to put in this work. We're going to have to drill down in the states and prepare and mobilize folks and educate them so that we're sharing information, accurate information, and not spreading a narrative that is not our own. Right? Because on the left, we have a tendency to elevate negative narratives and use our opposition's language, and we have to stop doing that because we're suppressing our own votes. And so give me 1 second, y'all. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show all of you just a little bit of what we are doing at the Democracy Initiative, right? So we're asking you all to join the fight, to step up and participate. If you sign up with us with this link that I dropped into the chat, we're asking that the way that we beat back voter suppression and we win in November is to do the following. Step one, folks need to know the rules. The deadlines are a guideline, but things are changing every day in the states. And so you need to identify those trusted validators and those sources that can give you the information you need so that you can share that with folks so they know if you're voting by mail, the deadline may have changed. Getting that information out to folks so that we can ensure that your votes are protected and they are counted. Step two, you have to make a plan for voting. Please, you make a plan. You got to check your registration status, apply for your ballot, fill it out, get it back in as soon as possible. And then step three, step up, come join us. We're training every week. We have a training on Tuesday at 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. Happy to sign up, happy to bring you into that one or to any of the trainings that we're going to be doing going forward, right? We have to mobilize folks to stand in the gap at every step of this process because they're doing everything that they can because we are winning, y'all. They know that we are sick and tired of the status quo, and they're stepping up their game because they see us organizing and building collective power, the likes of which that they haven't seen in decades. So let's keep this energy and match it. Sign up. Call your senators, demand that they fully fund, they bring their behinds back to Washington and fully fund our elections because it is our money that should determine and provide the stability that we need to have an effective and successful and safe election. And also, folks need to be patient. We know that it is going to take several weeks to count ballots. We're not going to have an answer election night, and we're going to have a fight in the courts after. So stay posted. Spread that information and tell folks to be patient because this battle is going to January. So feel free to reach out to us at the Democracy Initiative. We love you all. Thank you to Netroots for giving us a space to talk about this work. And remember, if you're not from a community, I find the folks who know the work, who know the people, and can help you, guide you, engage with folks. We don't need to traumatize people who are already hurt by the way that we're showing up in this work. Thank you. Thanks, Marilyn. Thanks, panelists, again.
Peace and love, y'all. Peace and love.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Brittany, thank you for everything. Marilyn, thank you so much for moderating. But thank you so much for including us.
No, thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Bye, folks.